Welcome to the XJO podcast. Here we explore journalism innovation, including how academics share their research in new ways that target wider audiences. This podcast showcases some of the researchers on the XJO team. I'm Macenzie Rebelo, and I'm an RA with XJO. With me now is Dr. Charles Davis. Charles is a professor at the RTA School of Media and research project leader for the Explanatory Journalism Project. Hey Charles, thanks for joining me. How are you?
Hi, Macenzie, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, can you break down what your research is about?
This particular project is about public service media and public demand for it, political support for public service media, which, as you know, is intended to be universal. It's supposed to represent all the people in the country. But in polarized societies, there's controversy about who does public service media actually represent. So in particular, we're looking at CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and its English language services.
And how would you say this is related to the larger project in journalism innovation?
Well, the larger project, which is called XJO, the Global Journalism Innovation Lab, is about innovation in journalism, in the changing, rapidly changing conditions for journalism in the world. And public service media provides not only news but also entertainment. But it's a model that has existed for a long time, and in the current situation, it needs to adapt, particularly in ways that allow it to reach different audiences who are in different places. So that's part, I think, of the challenge to public service media is to reach new audiences and to convince these audiences to serve them properly with a value proposition.
What methodological innovations did you use to gather your research?
We used um, computational methods, computational social science methods, in particular, topic modeling, which uses a computer clustering of words to identify topics. We used machine learning in order to classify statements about the CBC, and we used network analysis to draw graphs, complex graphs of relationships among tweets.
And what kind of conclusions did you come to?
Well, one conclusion that we came to is that formal consultation about CBC is much more polite than the kinds of discourse that one finds in counterpublics on Twitter, for example. When people submit what are called interventions or opinions to the regulatory agency, the CRTC, in general, they're not inflammatory, and that sort of consultation tends to attract more people who support the organization than who oppose it. On the contrary, on Twitter, which is largely unregulated, um, there's an opportunity to use social media to amplify voices of people who believe that they are marginalized by the political system. And very specifically, they believe that they want to defund the CBC, and they've been able to use Twitter, especially during periods of great national stress, during, for example, the Occupy Ottawa truckers movement, um, to get a lot of publicity for their policy ideas, such as defunding the CBC. So they can create a louder voice using social media than they can using official consultative pathways. Let me put it that way.
And is CBC fulfilling its mandate? Do critiques of the broadcast hold any merit?
Well, it has a very broad mandate, and in a sense, it's unfulfillable because it has to be something, provide something for everyone. And Canada is a huge country and very diverse. Um, and with media fragmentation, it's hard to be able to provide something to everyone. So in that sense, um, it may there how shall I say this? Uh, there's room for improvement. And the specific critiques of CBC are, first of all, that its English language television is losing market traction. That is, people are not watching it in droves. And then the second one is some groups believe that CBC is promoting the government ideology, and diversity and multiculturalism and not being sufficiently attentive to people who have specific religious beliefs and that sort of thing. So it's taking a position and they don't necessarily like that. So in that sense, it might be accused of not fulfilling its mandate. But on the other hand, since diversity is written right into the legislation, it is fulfilling its mandate. So in my view, it's doing well considering that it's relative to other public service media, it's very much underfunded.
How could the CBC adapt?
Well, they've tried to increase their revenue by selling advertising, and that has that has an upside, which means it brings in revenue. But the downside is they compete or they're believed to compete with private media. They haven't had a subscription campaign yet. Most of the money is provided by a parliamentary appropriation. Okay, about I think 2/3 of their funding is comes from Parliament, and the rest comes from ads and sales of services and that sort of thing. So I think there's a limit to what they can do to earn their money outside of a parliamentary appropriation. There are other models for funding public service media, which is, a tax, for example, on devices. That's how they do it in the UK. Um, Here, what is being advocated is not an annual appropriation, but a 5-year commitment, for example, so that they can plan for 5 years out.
What's the value proposition that could be sold to new audiences?
One important value proposition is that it's about Canada and it's Canadian voices. So it represents the Canada that we are and that we're becoming. And I think that's important. You don't find that on other channels, no matter how excellent the content is, you don't find that on other channels. And it's comprehensive. It covers the country from east to west and north to south. It's got French and English programming as well. So it's extremely unlikely that private media could provide the same services because the CBC provides services in markets that basically aren't big enough to sustain the quality of broadcasting that it provides. So that's an important value proposition. And also, it's important for democracy, right? Because it needs to be a place that provides reliable programming, fact-based programming, and looking at a variety of views objectively. So it's even though there are groups who say that it doesn't do that, um, I'm not convinced that they're absolutely right about that. I There have been studies about CBC's bias, and they don't show systematic bias. So, but CBC has to be accepted broadly by the population in order to have legitimacy, and that's one of the problems right now with media fragmentation and social polarization.
So, what is it about social media that makes the negative messaging about CBC stick?
That's a good question. It's because the social media amplifies voices and it helps people to find like-minded people who share the view and also want to propagate it. So you can create these, hashtag networks that rapidly amplify and diffuse certain messages. Now, that doesn't mean that people who don't share those views listen to those messages, they just ignore them. So, in that sense, it creates silos or bubbles. That's what it is. It's not like mass media where it's the same message for everyone.
That was Dr. Charles Davis, focusing on the publics, counterpublics, and public service media. To learn more about Charles's work and the XJO project, visit us at tmu.ca-explanatory-journalism.